Alrighty, my friends, welcome back to our second video for concerning air pollution. So in the previous video, we had a quick introduction of the atmosphere, or maybe a revisit of the atmosphere, and a brief sort of introduction about what air pollution is, what are the chemicals or what are the molecules that are involved in air pollution, and sort of started to tap into this idea of the agency that is responsible for monitoring our air quality potential issues. So what we're going to look at in this next video is how air quality is now, and also the regulations put in place to hopefully reduce air pollution, and where we can kind of go from here. And we'll also, of course, touch on acid rain. Some things that won't be covered in these videos but are covered in your books, or in your book, include indoor air pollution. And I really encourage you to hone in on that idea a little bit more. Generally not something that's a huge issue here, but maybe you've heard about this current little fight going on about gas burners in homes, and how maybe some somewhat local governments are trying to ban gas stoves in new homes that are being built. There is a reason for that. It's not because we hate gas and we hate gas burners and it's the more efficient way to cook, but screw being efficient. In fact, it's because people don't actually use their hoods in their kitchens when they are at home. If anyone here has ever worked in the service industry or in a restaurant, you know that the hood in the kitchen has to be working and on. Otherwise, your kitchen is a no-go, all right? You gotta have that circulating air. You gotta be pulling that gas air out of that small enclosed space in order for the restaurant to be up and working. It's literally just what happens. So that's kind of the reason, by the way, why there's like a lot of why that law or why that potential banning is in the conversation. So, but that's here. There are other ways and other methods of indoor air pollution in other areas. Okay, so let us look at this is a map that I encourage you to look into. It is actually part of one of your assignments this week. This is looking at the counties designated non-attainment, so not meeting the Clean Air Act's for air quality standards. This is something that I got recently, so this is from 2024. And so look at the legend here and see which counties are designated for non-attainment for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 of the pollutants, right? So maybe look in where you are at, maybe look at different areas of the country, and see where is not doing super well. And I encourage you to consider also like perhaps industries in that area, or maybe population centers. So what city could this be? What city is this? What cities are here? What's going on in California? That kind of thing, right? So really kind of fascinating, I think, to consider that. And look at where is doing pretty dang well, like Hawaii. What's not in Hawaii? Sorry that Guam is kind of cut off here, but I encourage you to, it's just how my screenshot happened, so I apologize for that. But kind of interesting, I think, to check how we're doing around the country. Let's see here. So you can, on the EPA website, you can look at specific pollutants. And so this map here is showing ozone non-attainment areas compared to the 2015 standard. So you can look at the non-attainment classification, where the red is extreme and down to marginal. And so really kind of looking in at the various counties here and who's not doing super well and who is doing very well. So Central California, not doing so great, even down in LA, right? If you ever have the chance to take either my oceanography class or my weather class, we often look at satellite imagery, and especially in the wintertime, you can see pretty clearly actually the haze that occurs in Central California. And it's kind of wild that you can see it from space, right? Kind of wild. So I encourage you, pause this video and or float around the EPA website and kind of see how things match up, perhaps to what you've experienced. So how do we clean things up? Well, guess what? And we kind of talked about this a little bit when we talked about environmental policy, but I want to recall back the Clean Air Act. It was passed in 1970. It's been amended several times, trying to set limits on air pollutants. Of course, these can limit change as scientists give us a better understanding of the health and risks. We have primary and secondary standards here. And again, the initial focus was on 6 criteria pollutants, but now we've expanded it to air toxins, mercury, and CO2. The states are responsible for meeting federal deadlines and developing state implementation plans. And this is an example of a policy that is working, right? If you talk to anyone who lived in LA back in the 60s and 70s, they will tell you that the air quality there was horrendous, right? You think the smog there is bad now. It used to be worse, which is kind of, you're like, what? And yeah, no, it's true. It used to be worse. So this is something that is working. And these have helped lower the air pollutants and toxic pollutants. Something that was kind of a criticism of regulations like this is, oh, it's going to impact the economy. Oh no, capitalism. I need to make money. But we can show, and on the next slide, I will actually show this, that GDP can still grow and we can reduce air pollution. It's just a thing, right? And thankfully, this has helped improve the quality of air that we breathe. And these pollutants have improved over time, which is fantastic. And it helps save lives, right? So less lung and respiratory problems, longer lifespan. It's great. This graph here is showing the growth areas and declining emissions. So GDP, still on the rise. Good job, America. Vehicle miles traveled, population still increasing, energy consumption, CO2 emissions, and aggregate emissions, those 6 common pollutants. So we can see here that we can still have a soaring GDP and have a decline in bad air pollutants. Who knew, right? And I feel like this is really going to continue as we tend to find more and more renewable sources that are clean, less car combustion vehicles. I'm not saying completely ban them or completely get rid of them. They have a time and a place, but at least reducing them, having energy more efficient vehicles, electric v hybrid v combustion or gas powered vehicles. There's that huge conversation to be had, but we can indeed go forward in economics and go forward in overall atmospheric health, right? It's kind of a cool thing. Also, something to point out, what happened in 2020? And we saw a very dramatic decrease in each of these, except for population, which is kind of interesting there, I think. But we can see a dramatic dip in a few of these things. This is another figure from the EPA website, so I encourage you can kind of float around and find this as needed. And unfortunately, the EPA just in general is kind of under attack, right? Mostly from the previous administration, but it's still consistently under attack. It's a government agency. We love to spend all of our money on military and frankly nothing else. So this can be a sector that could kind of get slashed in terms of funding. This quote obviously is from 22 years ago. If you're watching this in spring of 2024, so it's definitely dated, but it kind of goes to show how long the EPA has been under attack. So a 2002 report concluded that simply by enforcing existing clean air legislation, the U.S. could have saved at least another 6,000 lives per year and prevent 140,000 asthma attacks. So it's hard to enforce laws when there's not funding for the agency that's supposed to enforce them. The things that we can do, of course, would be limit fossil fuel combustion as much as you can, which can help reduce air pollution, again, spare the air days. And we even saw it as well during COVID when everyone was in lockdown. Not only was traffic so much better, but our air quality here was much better as well, except for during fire season. But really, really things to keep in mind. And going back to the previous video, looking at those tables and the primary pollutants, or the primary pollutants, it's like, what were the sources of all those? A lot of those anyway. A lot of those sources were from cars and vehicles, right? So things like better public transportation, better city planning and city management, more efficient cars, etc., are a way that we can improve air quality just by kind of our day-to-day habits, right? But there's other ways as well. So I encourage you to think of other ideas in which we can make the atmosphere more livable for all humans involved. Okay, so last concept that I want to address here is acidic deposition. So maybe when you were younger and you heard about acid rain, maybe you had this idea in your head like I did of like, oh my gosh, acid rain is gonna like burn my skin off, like from the Who Framed Roger Rabbit and the Goop, or whatever it's called, the Dip, where it kills cartoons, right? If you haven't seen that movie, by the way, fantastic, well done, highly recommend. But that's what I had always thought when I had heard about what acid rain is. But it's really important here to note that it's not just what can happen to the particulates in the rain or precipitation. There's also something called dry deposition. So I want us to kind of turn away from calling it acid rain and call it acidic deposition. So air pollution, by the way, does not have political or country boundaries or state boundaries or county boundaries. Air pollution doesn't care. Air pollution goes wherever the wind takes it, literally. So thankfully, we're pretty lucky here in California that we are not upwind from a state or country that does heavy polluting. Our nearest thing is China, which is across the Pacific Ocean. Thank goodness for us, right? But some folks are not as lucky. And we do actually get some pollution from China, by the way, because China is the world's factory and they are a developing nation. And so they burn a lot of fossil fuels, burn a lot of coal, to help, run their factories and such like that. So we actually do get a little bit of impacts from them. So other things to note here are, of course, the causes. What are the emission sources? Which are the primary pollutants? And then we have our secondary pollutants through chemical reactions. So you have, we naturally have oxygen and water in our atmosphere, so that chemically reacting with sulfur dioxide and NOx can then create sulfuric acid and nitric acid, which then can be dry deposited onto plants, which can go into the roots, or can be wet deposited into lakes, streams, rivers through precipitation, and at trees at higher elevations that are usually shrouded in fog for much of the year. Acidic fog can be a problem here, so then that can get into the leaves, which can, acidify the plant life, which is kind of wild here. And animals themselves actually have a range of tolerance of acids. Higher acids can, of course, harm and kill animals. Acids also, by the way, can have an impact on infrastructure. Anything on like steel or metal or limestone can deteriorate that material faster than it would, say, if the acidic compounds were not in the atmosphere or waterways. So kind of interesting to think of that. Think of like the Statue of Liberty, right? That used to not be the color that it is. And think about why that is, right? Chemical reactions. So science playing a role here. Let's see here. So this is an image of the pH scale. So this is how we measure acidity. So I encourage you to maybe pause the video a little bit, remind yourselves of the pH scale. Goes from 0 to 14, 7 here in the middle, and various examples of acidic things versus basic things. And this is, by the way, from my oceanography textbook. So the stuff here on the left-hand side is going towards environmental effects in the oceans. So it's really something to consider because ocean acidification is actually a huge problem, and one that's near and dear to my heart, of course, because of what I teach and my discipline backgrounds. But it's not just something that happens in the oceans. It is something that happens all over the world. And lastly, this is an image from your book looking at where acidic deposition is an issue. This is 1988 here on the left-hand side, looking at nitrate deposition, and 2018 nitrate deposition. So we can see a huge improvement on nitrate deposition from late 1980s to 30 years later. Fantastic, you love to see it, but not always. We still have room for improvement, I think, right? Which makes sense. And I also want you just to point out where, or recognize where there's more acidic deposition happening. Is it in the West Coast, or is it in the East Coast? Is it in the flatlands? Is there industry near this? So I very much encourage you to look further into these ideas, into perhaps the sources, and think of other ways in which we can better improve the quality of our atmosphere and our land areas too, because we depend on these things, right? One last little note here that I really feel like I have to say, because I am the meteorologist of the group: chemtrails are not real. That is not a real thing. The government is not trying to poison you through emissions from an airplane. They have to breathe that air too, right? If they want to poison you, they'll do it through the water. Look at Flint. But those are called contrails. This is a very natural reaction from very hot exhaust going out of the back of the plane, going into moist atmosphere, and quickly expanding and cooling and creating something called a contrail, which is a type of cloud. All right, so no chemtrails. That's not a real thing. So I just have to really feel like I have to mention that, because it, goes into this idea of air pollution and what folks think that can be polluting the air, when in fact, that's not true. Okay. Thank you all so much for watching our second installment of air pollution. Like I said, make sure to read your book very carefully on some of the other things that we do not touch in these videos. And thank you so much, as always, for watching. Have a great rest of your day, evening, afternoon, all that.